Okay, I messed up. I don't know how I did it, but I did. With all my experience, I still managed to screw this up, and I didn't even realize it until I was finished. Can you see it? Well, let's go back to the beginning. We'll take a look at my process and walk through the 3 stages and 4 states of watercolor and see where I made my mistake. So today I'm going to be painting a watercolor of a fox. I think I'm going to have to go clear back to my initial sketch and see if there is any problems with this stage. And you can see me working up a rough, quick sketch lightly on my paper. I'm using the Canson paper again. I'll be using and working with my small travel pan of watercolors. I'll place those affiliate links in the descriptions of this video. If you do purchase anything using those description links, I'll get a small commission on that, so thank you for your support. Now I'm starting to work on the shapes, get the right angles, get everything just right on the face of this fox. Maybe this is where my mistake begins. Let's see. I bet if you are a beginner and learning how to watercolor, a lot of your problems can exist clear back here at the sketch stage, and it's just a matter of how loose, how tight you need to have this sketch for that structure to carry through to the wet work when you start adding the colors and the saturation and everything, your color blocking, your various stages. So it can happen right here. All right, starting to work in the eye. And as I refine the sketch, I get a little darker on the detail. In this instance, I do want a little bit of a tighter looking sketch. A lot of fur, trying to keep an irregular and naturalistic kind of mark. So it really boils down to the mark making. So if you're having trouble getting any sketches, and at this point, this is where a lot of students, when they're learning, how much detail, how much work should go into the initial sketch, and that just takes time, a little practice, figure out what you're doing, and refine your mark making, get a good handle on those marks and the type of marks you're making. So there's fur on this, so I'm doing a lot of broken edges, trying to indicate a fur pattern. So when you get into painting animals with furry textures and things like that, you don't do it by the strand, you do it by shapes and broken edges. I'm just still bouncing around, adding a little more specificity, a little more detail, blocking out shapes that I can work with when it's wet in the first stage, the color blocking. I'm working quickly, and I think I do see where I went wrong even at this stage, but it was something I could have fixed at later stages of the watercolor. I just was rushing through, trying to keep a short tutorial, and that's where it helps to just step back, take a look at your piece, and try not to rush. All right, now we're into stage 1. I'm mixing up solution of burnt sienna, some red, some oranges, a little yellow ochre, and I'm blocking in wet on dry initially. Working in a whole range of colors. Had 2 puddles mixed up, a reddish, more reddish burnt sienna color and a more of a yellow ochre color. So I have a little color variety in this initial wash. I'm using a flat brush, coming in, defining the edge, doing the background first. I'm working with that Canson paper, like I said, so it's going to dry quick, which is one reason I've decided to really kind of start with a wet on dry and then work the other color in while the the areas are wet. I'm working with the edges of that brush, trying to get that irregular edge of the fur. It's a sharp edge, but that's okay. It's kind of a nice stylistic choice. Mixing up my marks, changing angles. So the background's blocked. Mixing up a nice orange with a little yellow ochre. We got a spot on the body that has this bright orange color. And now blocking in. Again, color blocking, you're just working big shapes, adding some color variety, letting the shapes do their things if necessary. And in this case, because of the fur, I'm creating these diagonal, these edgy lines to create an irregular edge on the back side. But it's a big shape. And it's wet. I could come back in with some other colors right now, but all I really want is the general color, just blocking in that basic local color. So adding a little bit of the darker now down at the bottom of that lighter color. While it's still wet, we get some nice color interactions, some blending. Now I'm going after more of a tan, so I'm going to get more of a brown color mixed up for the in and around the ears, the top of the head. Again, big shapes, irregular edges. You don't want anything mechanical looking, so you do have to bounce around and let those edges have a natural edge, an irregular edge. It's sharp. Again, it's wet on dry. And then I introduce other colors into the wet spots. And now I'm softening. Just a damp brush. I'm working with my 1/4 inch brush. Just softening it up. I want it to be of a lighter value and a softer edge. The Canson paper is good about reactivating, and you can kind of soften out any of those sharp edges and pull that color out. And I think I kind of see an issue that I created right here as I was painting this. Even at this spot in the color blocking, but it's not anything you can't fix. So even though I am talking about the problems I have with this, I can still come back in and we can fix it. There's going to be options. So if you stick through this, I'll go over some of the basic options that I have to maybe rectify and fix the issue that's bothering me, the thing that I noticed. Softening edges again. Trying to get some color variation and variety within that brownish wash. So this is a much browner wash than that bright orange. Adding a little bit of that in and around the snout and down in some shadow areas. And now the cool colors, that front area. And we are getting close to having everything blocked out in stage 1. I'm going to just keep blocking a little more of that cool color. Up there on the snout, it's more of a shape. Don't have to worry so much about that edge. But back there on the just under the jawline, I want kind of a texture. And this is just pretty much it for stage 1. It's going to dry, and we're going to get started with stage 2. All right, that's kind of a quick drying transition, but it is dry now, and I'm blocking in, adding saturation, finding secondary shapes within the big shapes we blocked into stage 1. So now it's more saturation and developing more shapes, detailed shapes, different colored shapes, and working with strokes and angles and direction with the types of mark I'm making. And again, I'm working with a flat brush, which gives me that nice flat edge, that stroke, so you can switch between big areas of color and down to lines of color. That first pass was really a dark reddish orange, and I'm adding in a little burnt umber, burnt sienna, a darker brownish color. It's still wet down there, so there's going to be a lot of color interaction between the orange color, the darker orange color, and this darker brown. And that nice burnt sienna, that darker brown on top of that orange, it just serves as a nice means of developing a more complex series of shapes and forms. So far I haven't seen any major problems with this point. Blocking in colors, I don't think I've done myself any issues here. I'm working with more of the raw umber color now, trying to get that nice furry texture on the snout, under the eye, the forms right in there, the darker areas, to try to create a sense of form. All right, using that dark raw umber, burnt sienna, actually it's burnt umber, a nice dark shape on the backside of that ear. And again, creating those secondary shapes on top of the primary blocking that we did in stage one. We're just adding that color saturation and secondary forms. And it's that transition from one color, one hue, one tone into the next. That's what creates that illusion of form. All right, now I'm going to introduce some kind of a steel gray, a darker color of that blue into the shadow areas under the chin, and start defining some of the fur using this darker steel gray. Again, working with those edges of my brush to pull lines and textures, not so much big shapes, although I paint the edges and lines in a manner that they read as shapes. A little more of a phthalo blue mixture down on the bottom, a change of plane right down there, so that's why the color changes. And thinking of direction, the direction you make your marks is going to have an impact on how the colors interact on the surface to read as fur, because there is direction in those locks of fur, and you want to indicate that with the type of mark that you're making. Dropping a little of the cool colors up in the ear, on the top part of the nose. Again, just developing that color complexity. And now I'm actually using the edges of the brush to create some of those locks, those shapes of fur. Alright, everything's dried one more time, and then we're kicking into stage 3, and we'll see if this is where I recognize, and I know I don't, but this is where I should have recognized the problems that I later saw at the end of the painting. So now I'm starting in, and I'm drawing with a really dark mixture of burnt umber and some ultramarine blue, and I'm drawing detail. I'm coming in, adding specificity. And if I am painting a character, an animal, a person, it's when you start working on the eyes. That's when your painting is really going to start to pop. And bouncing around, looking for any of the darkest darks that I can start painting in here. The area on the snout, under the lip, that whole edge of his mouth right along the lip, underneath the chin, all has very dark values to paint in. I'm just bouncing around. We're at that stage 3, where there's so much little details and strokes and touches, and we're mixing a lot thicker saturated colors and really adding in that contrast, the detail. We're going to start developing more of the fur textures, either with the darks, or we'll get darker versions of the blues, the browns, the oranges, and really start developing all of those textures. And right now, I can tell right now, this is the area that I should have been paying attention to. I think with students, as they're learning watercolor, it's stage 3, where all of the magic little pops and details and just little subtle things that really bring a piece to life. This is the stage that the students tend to overlook or work too quickly through. And it's where you're covering the least amount of space, but each one of those strokes is really doing so much work in the overall grand scheme of the painting. So stage 3 is the longest phase of watching paint dry in this video, but I'll just continue to bounce around into various shapes, adding those those pops of contrast and detail and feathered edges, and just work to try to get that sense of fur. So sit back, watch this as it develops, and I'm going to reveal what I feel was the problem in this piece and some ideas on how I'm going to fix it, maybe in the next video. So now I'm really working on the texture of the fur, getting all those various locks and colors to indicate the depth, the high points, the low points of the fur on the animal. Well, as I'm finishing up on this piece, I'll tell you what I did wrong. the eye. It was the eye. I didn't spend enough time getting the right placement of the eye or the angle of the eye correct on this fox. And looking back on it now, and as I was finishing it up and prepping this video, I realized that it was too low and it's too flat. It needs to have a higher, steeper angle on it. But it is fixable. I don't think it's a make or break issue. The piece looks pretty good. I could probably live with it, and that's one of the questions you have to ask yourself when you do paint a piece and you can recognize various things that you should have fixed. Is it something, one, can you fix it? And two, should you fix it? Because once you commit to fixing it, if it doesn't work, you might as well just tear up the piece and do it again. Actually, I did this piece once already. I wasn't happy with it, so I re-recorded it again, and I still had problems. So I think I will. I'll do a video of me fixing that eye on this piece, and I'll post it soon, so keep an eye out for it. As I'm finishing up, adding all the little touches of details, the saturation, the contrast, the fur, the textures. I think overall I'm happy with the piece if it wasn't for that eye. And I'm going to fix it. And it'll be a good tutorial for you to watch to see how a piece can be fixed, because people a lot of times think that watercolor is something that's very hard, it's unforgiving, but it is. I have a good idea of how to fix that eye. I think the snout is too thick as well. So I'll see if I can maybe do something there. I doubt if I can on the snout, but definitely the eye I can fix. So this should be fun. So really, to recap, when you have a piece like this and you have a problem, you've got a few options in your toolkit there. One, and this is probably the hardest one, is to live with it. Maybe it's not worth fixing, all right? So is it worth that possibility of you messing it up, especially if you don't want to paint it again? But I oftentimes paint things multiple times just to work out issues. So here we are. We're back at the end, right where we started. And I'm starting to realize something doesn't quite look right. And I just sat around and looked at it and thought about it. And I realized that's what the problem was. And I think it's going to be a good lesson for you to learn and to watch and to see how it goes about being resolved. And if I'm lucky, I won't have to rip it up on screen. So there it is, a little fox. Hey, I hope you liked this video. If you got any value out of it, please give me a like. I appreciate any support that you have. Drop some comments for me too. Thank you for watching. And we'll see you in the next video.